So, hi, I'm Dia. You guys are watching Dinosaur. This is T-Rex and tacos, and I'm all out of tacos. And today we have Jessica A. McMinn, author of The Ruptured Sky, SPFBO 9 entrant, here with us. And hi, Jessica.
Hi,
And how, yeah, hi. Tell us a bit about yourself.
my name's Jessica. I am a dark fantasy or grimdark indie author from Australia. Um, I've been writing for as long as I can remember, like I'm sure most of us have been, and really enjoy sort of stuff that's got that dark and twisty slant to it.
Okay, so how does it feel to be a part of SPFBO 9? Something grand.
It's actually hugely overwhelming. I can't believe I managed to get in, considering it's been such a tight competition over the last couple of years. So I was really blown away by even just getting a spot and just seeing the support that the whole community has. Just even becoming an entrant is like just opening so many doors for exposure and new readers and everything. So it's kind of like, well, it doesn't really matter where things go from here. It's already been such a great stepping stone. So yeah, pretty chuffed.
So, have you read any of the other books in the competition?
So far I have read of Thieves and Shadows by BSH Garcia. I was lucky enough to have an ARC of her fantastic book. So it's absolutely mind blowing for a debut. So yeah, really happy I'm not in the same group as her for the phase one. And I've also read Cold West by Cam Snyder, a weird
Great.
western.
Great.
Clayton. That's it. Yeah. So and I recently read that one, but I've got a list of about, oh god, there's probably at least 30 that I really want to check out. But my immediate sort of top 10, I was involved with a big debut author giveaway back in May, and it just so happened that 8 of the 9 authors involved in that went on to go into to Spiffbo, so they're sort of my priority reads amongst the cohort there.
Okay, nice. So, what would you say sets your book apart from the other books in SPFPO?
These are always good questions when they ask specifically about book itself. I would say something that I'm quite proud of in that it is a dark fantasy and it is grim dark. Like there's some very awful stuff that happens, but I have sort of moved away from going with sort of like on page rape or sexual assault as being a trope of grimdark. So that's something I was happy to sort of be able to, I guess, not resort to using that just to solidify the darkness or the evilness of characters in the book. So that's one thing that I sort of would say sets it apart from grimdark in general. Others is that 3 of the 4 cast members are queer, of the 4 protagonists. So yeah, it's quite a diverse cast in that regards.
Yes, I mean, I feel that the diversity is the main strength of your book. That it explores such different experiences. So, you mentioned grimdark. I would like to ask you, like, what is your definition of grimdark?
For me, I would define grimdark as it's actually like I think it's a quote that Mark Lawrence has from somewhere. It's like hope defines the absence of hope or something. So it's where the odds seem incredibly stacked against the protagonist or the anti-heroes, depending on, I guess, what type of story it is, but where everything does seem hopeless and yet people are still trying for better or for worse. So their motivations might be a little bit grey, and things like that. I think that's probably a key part, is the moral greyness of the heroes, for that. But I think it's sort of that real defiance in that, hey, whatever the consequences are, we're going to follow through with what we're setting out to do.
And we usually don't see grimdark with a prophecy. Like prophecies are usually associated with, heroic fantasy and all that. So what made you, like write about a prophecy?
Well, I think so. For me, I didn't set out to say write to market or write a specific genre when I started. I first came up with the idea for the Ruptured Sky a good 20 years ago. I was in junior high at the time, and so that was when I guess the whole prophecy and the chosen one trope sort of manifested, because that was really a real big part of the fantasy that was going around at the time that I was exposed to, be it through video games or anime or things like that I was consuming. So that sort of formed the foundation. But as I grew and my interest grew, I started to become more interest in the darker, the grittier, kind of messed up stuff. So it was sort of me just trying to blend things together, and just because I guess a path has been laid out before you in destiny doesn't necessarily mean it's a good one or the right thing.
Yeah, that's another thing I wanted to ask you, is that like a book with prophecy, it's been done a lot of times, but how did you manage to make it, fresh?
Yeah, I think it's for me, really. So I went through a creative writing degree at university. That was my major, was literature. So a lot of that was, I guess, looking at tropes, and we were sort of gone through the process of, that's cliched, avoid that, stay away from doing these type of things. Whereas I guess in the commercial world, as coming into it as an author, they're actually the kind of things you want to do, because that's how you sell books. So it's sort of like an interesting point for me, is going against what I was trained to do, and also then I guess looking at what's going to be profitable. So I'm sort of in I guess a weird space where I have aimed to subvert things that I know are tried and tested tropes, and see if we can take a fresh spin on them. And that, I guess, in this is we do have the reluctant hero and the chosen one, which is not necessarily an abnormal combination. That happens quite a lot. But we've also sort of looking at where it's, yeah, we're following the path, but is it the right one? I guess it's always said, this is destiny, it's what you're born to do, it's going to save the world, or is it?
Okay. So tell us a bit about your writing process.
Oh yeah, I don't have one as such. So I think when we often see the whole plotter and pantser approach that people take, I'm very much sort of the chaotic plantser in the middle. I sort of just do what I want when I feel like it. So I might have days where I will write thousands of words in one session because I'm just really switched on and that's where I'm at. Or I won't do anything for months. And I mean, it took me 2 decades to write one book. So I need to sort of refine this a bit because I do want to have a production schedule so I can be a career author. But I guess I have a very loose plan in that I have a general idea of where the story is going. I think I have an end now, which I didn't necessarily have when I started. So I think that's sort of nutted out, and I know that there will be 4 books for it. So another 3 to go, but we won't wait 2 decades between them, I promise. So
Good
I
to know.
think so. Yeah, because we do leave the first one on a bit of a doozy of a cliffhanger. So no, won't keep you waiting too long for that. But yeah, I have a very loose, a little bit more planned for book 2. in that I have sort of like a basic chapter breakdown where, like, chapter 1, this thing happens. But that's, I guess, the extent of my planning. I might know whose chapter it is because I have the 4 characters, whose chapter it is, generally what they're going to do, but it changes very quickly and often quite significantly, which can either cause me to write a lot faster because it's all flowing, it's exciting, or I'm going to write myself into a corner and then I've got to try to backtrack and sort of get it back to some sort of direction where I need it to go, and that. So yeah, it can be pretty wild.
So talking about characters, how do you come up with your characters?
Oh,
Like you
this
have
so
4 characters, very distinct voices, and very distinct voices, and I just want to know, like, how do you come up with them?
they've been with me so long, it's kind of really hard to think about where they originally came from. I think Amica was definitely the first one, being she's essentially the central character. So she was the first one that sort of took form. A lot of her was actually originally inspired from Padme Amidala from Star Wars
Oh,
Episode 1. So that was, again, sort of speaking to my age there, that was something that I was happening at the time. And I was like, we had this strong heroine and everything. And it's sort of because of what happens with them destroying sort of Padme's character arc, also sort of is what sort of got Amica being the opposite of that. Like she's not driven by romance, she's not driven by love. So that was sort of something, a conscious choice that I needed to pull away from that, because I had, I guess, my inspiration that let me down, and didn't want that to sort of come across. So really removed that entirely. And the others have all really just been, they're all little bits and pieces of everything, like video game characters. Some of them have aspects of me in them, or maybe aspects I wish I had, or aspects that are the complete opposite of me. So that's why I find them so interesting to explore, because they would do things and say things that are so different to my own experience. So I'm a people pleaser. I'm a rule follower. I'm like lawful good. So having these characters that are very much like do what they want because they want to, I just find really interesting, because they're very different for me. And that's also sort of plays with the central theme where we've got I guess the friction between doing what you have to do, between like your duty, and then also between desire. So I think all of them have that sort of friction between, they've got a path they should be following, but they've got a path that they want to do, and going one way or the other necessarily isn't the right course. So yeah, that's something that I think, because I'm always like, right, that's the right way, I'm told I'm to do that, I will do that thing. So having a play around with what happens if you sort of go off the road really sort of, yeah, was important to me in building the characters.
okay. Which POV was the most difficult to write?
So when I first started, when I sort of really got into doing multiple POVs, very early drafts, it was just Amica. So I only followed the one perspective. And then I sort of read a Song of Ice and Fire, so Game of Thrones, and started to see, I'm like, oh, okay, so you don't need to just follow one character. That was sort of like I know it's very common, but that was the eye opener for me. And that's when I'm like, okay, well, I think Keo's got more of a story to tell because he's physically in a different location to the other characters, and Ray has a lot going on. So then I started to branch off into their stories. And then in a later draft, I was like, okay, I think Kriya needs a little bit more going on. So he was the last POV to come into it. So he did give me a lot of grief writing, because I hadn't spent as much time in his headspace. So it took me a little bit more to sort of get my head around him. The one that was the hardest, though, was Keo. He gave me so much grief because I actually overhauled his entire character arc twice. So it was, and between like the beta reads, like I completely changed some of his motivations, his whole storyline, like what he was doing really changed quite significantly. So his was really, really hard. And I think I'd sit down to write a Keo chapter and I'd be like, oh God, why? But now coming and working on book 2, actually, Keo and Kriya have the most screen time so far. I'm probably about 70% through, and they've got a lot of action, and I'm really enjoying them. I think because they gave me so much grief in book 1, I ended up spending more time with them, so I know them a lot better now. So sort of flipped it around there.
So, okay, I wanted to ask you about the world building. So, how
Yeah.
did you come up with the world, like the ruptured sky, the goddess, and all that?
So I think a lot of it with the goddesses, okay, a lot of that actually came from Zelda. Ocarina of Time was sort of like where I'm like, oh, goddesses that came and they make the land and all this stuff. And then sort of, so I guess it starts with something pretty generic and kind of wholesome, and then I sort of just break it down and make it darker and everything. So the Mia Hiren, which are the magical beings in the world. So they were very much inspired by Tolkien's elves, particularly the Lothlorien elves. So sort of like their world with like they're all surrounded by nature and it's all very peaceful and they're all very ethereal, but they're also kind of arrogant because they live forever. They're a bit better than everyone else. So it's like a darker twist on again something that's sort of like, oh, Tolkien. So that's some of the things, the elements, I guess the magic where we're sort of like drawing from nature. That actually sort of the inspiration behind that was Final Fantasy VIII. If anyone's played that, they'll probably get that now that I've mentioned it. But that's sort of like the whole thing, like they've got to have a source to, instead of conjuring stuff up out of nowhere, balance. So yeah, because it's been such a long project in development. It's just so many different sources that it's come from. A lot of video games. They've been a huge inspiration on the world building, the characters, and everything. I think because a lot of this was during my teenage years when I was in high school, I wasn't actually reading a lot. I was mostly playing video games like most irresponsible teens. So it's only sort of been in the last sort of 5-6 years that I've really gotten back into reading again. So now I'm starting to draw more inspiration back from those sources. But yeah, a lot of video games really came into play.
So, you said that you started reading more and more recently. And who are your, literary inspirations?
So going like way back to when I guess first sort of thought like, oh, I really want to be a writer, an author. Leanne Hearn was sort of my first one where I'm like, oh, I really like what she's doing. So she's an Australian author and she wrote this sort of literary fantasy series called Tales of the Atori. So it's like a Japanese fantasy, like historical Japanese inspired fantasy series. I always loved Japan. I lived in Japan for 5 years, so that was sort of like a
Oh,
connection there as well with that. So, and I really liked the blend of literature and I guess the fantasy genre because again, going through university, we spent all this time just being like genre fiction was always really downtrodden. Like you don't want to write bestsellers, you don't want to write romance, you don't want to write crime, you certainly don't want to write fantasy. But as what everyone likes to read, of course I want to write that. So I guess I'm wanting to blend, I guess, what I've learnt from my literature background in with I guess genre fiction. So that sort of there are a couple of authors now that I've really been enjoying. I think the one that's really hit me most recently was Crystal Matar with The Legacy of the Brightwash. Like that just blew me away with everything I want to be, basically. So that's been a really big one. I also do like George R. R. Martin. I think again he has a lot of nuance in his work, as and very excessive world building and things like that. I don't necessarily want to take things that far because I do like things to happen and to move quickly. And Robin Hobb is another big one that has such strong character driven work, with that darkness that flows underneath. So they're sort of ones that have been really big. Also Anna Stevens for Women in Grimdark, and I've recently started Anna Smith Spark, and I'm vibing with her and her literature-esque voice, and everything. So yeah, I think I'm slowly finding my people now in writing, because I'd been so out of the book space in regards to finding inspiration. So getting back into it now, which is really exciting.
Okay. So what I found unique about your book is that it strikes a very like it has a very well balance between character, plot, and world building. So how do you achieve that? What comes first to you, like characters or the world or the plot?
For me, definitely characters come first. So like just in my everyday life, I'll just be, hanging out, and then scenes will come into my head, and they will be character interactions. So that really is the core of where everything starts, and then the sort of other layers come in, probably plot, and then world building comes in last, which is probably backwards to what a lot of people do. Um, I've had a couple of people comment on how much they enjoyed the balance between the world building and the action and the character, and I have to give all that credit to one of my beta readers, who I went to uni with. He was very much like he's a very refined, like he cut a lot of unnecessary stuff, so it kept moving. Like there's enough there to give you that sense of what's happening, but you're not drowning in it, and it's not slowing up the action. So that was definitely thanks to his very, very sharp eye when it came to that, where he would be able to say, yeah, this is interesting, but this person lives in this city, so why is she observing the city now? Because it's not new to her. So being able to, I guess, identify and logically like show the world as what their characters themselves would be noticing, rather than just info dumping constantly.
So I usually don't mind info dumps, but this book it was very lean. Like it had, it was like action after action, but also enough character moments that made me care about the characters. Like usually in fast-paced books, you have trouble connecting with the characters, but here I was like my favorite character is Rehai. And I was like, I am invested in these characters till the end. I want to see them, be happy in life. So, who's your favorite character in this book?
Who's my favorite character?
Sorry?
Uh, Sorry, was that who's my
Yeah,
favorite
who's your
character?
favorite character? Yeah.
Yeah, look, I probably do have to say that Ray is probably my favorite as well. I really love the, I guess, the broken characters that hide. They hide like the quite layered, because they'll either hide behind sarcasm, they'll hide behind nastiness, or something like that, when there's like a lot of vulnerability and pain sort of like hanging. So like broken boys with baggage is kind of my thing. So I really like Keo as well, because he's a hot mess and we love him for it. But yeah, broken boys with baggage, that's probably going to be my thing moving forward. So readers out there, if that's what you like, get on board.
So we are halfway through the chat, and let's talk about some spoilers.
Mhm. Spoilers. Okay.
So I just wanted to know, like, okay, no, before we go to spoilers, one last question.
Yep.
How do you write action?
Ooh, action. I actually find the action scenes really hard to write because, like, I don't want things to get like I think when lots of things are happening, it's really hard to get lost for like the reader, and it's hard for me as a writer as well to not get lost with what's happening. I think because I am really big on character. I want sort of the emotion as well. So I don't just want to be describing the actions that's happening as well. Like, so it's sort of, I guess, breaking it down and trying to engage as many of the senses as I can in the action scenes to really help sort of bring the reader into the moment as well. So there is still that bit of introspection from the characters as well as, I guess, describing what's happening as well. But I think a lot of it I do like to leave in the hands of a reader as well. Like, I mean, we've all seen like a sword fight in a video, like a movie or something. So there's like that general idea of what's there. So, I mean, I don't want to be describing every lunge, every pirouette and things like that because I think it's just taking too much away, like from the moment when you're describing everything. I like to give a little bit to the reader to say, right, like, okay, there's a battle, like, have you can picture that. So I hope. So that's, I guess, I try not to overwhelm with too many words, but I like to bring in more senses. So that's sort of, I guess, how I'd like to approach the action scenes to really make it immersive without overwhelming.
Yeah, your action scenes and your writing in general, I feel, is very cinematic. Like,
Oh,
you can, like, I have trouble visualizing stuff, but while reading your book, I was like, I can see what is happening. Like, when I read the prologue, the entire scene, it was as if it was happening before my eyes. And I was like, okay, I'm sold. This book is gonna be a great book for me. So that's how I feel about your writing. And
I love
I'm
hearing
sure
that.
that
Thank
other
you.
people, and I'm sure other people also feel about it because Esme, she also raved about this book. So I feel that. Yeah. So
I
we'll
love that
jump
you
into.
said cinema. I love that you said like it's like a cinematic experience because that's actually how it is like in my head. So I am like constantly watching a movie of these characters, which makes me sound a little bit nutty, but that's what's like happening in my head. So then trying to like translate all of these visions and visuals and then put it into words, I think that's why it takes so long to get that all translated. So I'm really happy to hear that it is coming across as quite cinematic in its reading experience because that's how I experience it.
Okay. Okay. So my first question, Reminas. Oh my God. I mean, what a wild character. How did you get into the headspace of a character like that?
Was
Like,
this
what is
Reminisce?
Reminas? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, he was one I worked on a lot with my critique partner as well. Is we wanted to get the subtlety right. And again, we're talking spoilers, right? Everyone knows this is
Yeah, yeah.
spoilers.
Spoilers. I'll put
Perfect.
a.
So we're especially because we've already got like Kyo's head's immense, and he's sort of in this stage where he doesn't know. Like, well, he's so sure that he's right, but everyone's telling him that he's wrong. So I really needed to get that subtlety to come across in Reminisce, so it would really start to bring out that doubt for is Kyo just a drunk? Like, is he just so out of it he doesn't, there's nothing wrong with this guy. So it was sort of having to be really, and it was really hard to do. But look, I think I've got a bit of a dark and twisty side, so I really enjoyed doing it in a way. It's like, what's some really messed up stuff I can do? Like, hey, let's put that in. Yeah. So it's just fun. It's like I try to think of what's like the worst thing I've seen and then just turn it up.
So, I mean, next to Joffrey, like Reminus is the one, that comes to mind, who is like he gets pleasure out of torturing people. And
Yeah.
not torturing as in torturing, literally, but playing games with them,
Yeah.
psychological games and all that.
That's
So
great. Because I mean, Joffrey is he's such a hateable character that everyone just loves to hate him because he's just so awful. And to me, that's like the hallmark of a great villain is people they're sad when they die because they don't have their horridness to enjoy or hate anymore. So that's what like it was so satisfying when like Joffrey died or later when Ramsay died. Very satisfying, but at the moment you're like, oh, now he's gone. I don't get to see what he does next, kind of thing. So,
that's how I felt at the end. That's how I felt.
so I'm working on sort of turning it up a notch with the next villain that's sort of coming into play in the
Oh,
next book. So,
as a, how do you
Azital,
say that?
yes,
As a
Azital. Yeah, so he's going to be, I guess, the main protagonist. Where sort of he's trying to establish himself as a god, essentially. So that's a pretty hefty thing. So he's got a lot going on because he's also slightly insane. So we've got a different level of darkness to play with him. So, but yes, the sort of I guess the psychological torture and trauma that's still very much alive in book two.
And speaking of morally gray characters, gray is very, I mean, you see, okay, connection. There is, okay, there was some problem with the connection. Anyway, we are back. So we usually see those mentor characters, you know, but
Mm.
Gray is not a mentor character, like not a typical mentor character. So how did you come up with that?
So that was another sort of me subverting the standard tropes that you find because he was originally like, oh, he's the old man, he's here to guide us on our journey, and then I'm like, no, he's not. He's really not. So yeah, again, it was sort of that where I was looking at it and because I guess this is a project that was being high school and then university, so I've worked on it all through these times. So I guess it's sort of taking what I originally had, like your standard, very tropey, good versus evil adventure, and then just breaking it down into the sort of twisty mess that we've got now. So yeah, that's how Grey went from being I guess, the standard mentor character that you feel like really cut when he dies, to being all like, yeah, he's dead. Whatever. Probably a good thing.
So what I found interesting is that like Reminisce and Gray, they are not very different. Like they are, like they are capable of manipulating people in their life to get what they want. So that is an interesting, like parallel that I found in the book.
Mm.
And that is very well done in my opinion.
Oh, thank you. But I'm guessing, I hope anyway, that I guess people's dislike of Reminisce and dislike of Grey hit on different levels, even though, as you said,
Yeah.
they're essentially doing the same thing. But so, yeah, it's all, I guess,
They has this greater good kind of a motivation going on,
yeah.
which kind of, sheds a different sort of light on what he has done, the atrocities
Mm,
he has committed. But Reminas, he's doing it just for his own, revenge
yeah.
mentality and all that.
So I guess, like what that goes on there is it's the everyone's thinks they're the hero in their own story, so it's all perspective on why someone's more evil than another.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So Ray High. let's come to our favorite character.
Boy.
He has the most tragic backstory in the book. Like Kyo is also, his story is also tragic, but Rehai I found it's more tragic because his own, like his father used to abuse him and the way he and all that. So again, how did you come up with that?
um, Ray was he's gone through a lot of different he's had a lot of different backstories through the years. Um, and I think that was one that I settled on, but I also didn't want it to sort of be something that defined him. Rather, it's more like in spite of. So it's, I mean, we see parts of him where he's got that need for approval on some level. And that then there's also this fierce defiance on another. And so it's very like he's difficult to sort of get that because um well, like what he feels, what he shows, what he does, what he thinks, they're always quite at odds. And so it can be whether or not a lot of it was intentional on my behalf or whether it's just sort of how it came apart. Some of it could have been happy accidents or oversights of how they came together. But basically for Ray, it was like, what's a whole bunch of tragic stuff that can happen to people, and we'll just put it all into one little bag and go with it. Look, I want to say it gets better, but we do unravel a whole new layer of trauma for him in the books to come. It is mentioned throughout the Ruptured Sky, of where he talks about the failed mission to Korak. As you know from the end of the book, that's where they're headed to go find Keo. So we do get to unravel all of that trauma as well. And that's probably the heaviest stuff. I only probably actually wrote those scenes a few months ago, and yeah, it was hectic. So yeah, I'd like to say it gets better, but it doesn't.
Okay. So I'm like scared, for the future books to come because the way you're talking about things is scary.
Look, it's balanced. There's good and bad for it. Like there's lots of happy things, but I do like to then undercut them with less happy things quite soon after. Um, so it's a roller coaster, but yeah, hopefully it will be enjoyable.
And also it's grim dark, so there's gonna be, dark stuff happening.
Sorry.
It's grim dark, right?
Yes, grimdark.
Yeah.
So,
So dark
what do you
stuff is,
expect?
yeah, dark stuff will be happening.
Yeah, dark stuff happens.
So are we going to see more of uh Kriya's mother?
That's sort of one of the areas where I haven't fully mapped out. I know we do end up back in Ciricello, where she's living at some point, so she will return. But I'm just not fully sure on what capacity. But she does seem to be quite popular. I have heard a lot of people that have really quite liked her. So yeah, it will be certainly be taking that into consideration as I start to pull that later half of the series together. But she's not dead, so that's always a good sign.
Speaking of dead mothers, I was shocked when Reminas pulled out the head.
Mm.
I, like, although you had established in the beginning of the story that, like things can happen at any time with the kid dying and all that, but still I was very shocked when Reminas pulled out the queen's head. And So at this point, I just want to talk about, moments from the book. I just want to tell you how much they hurt me or how much it made me happy.
Well, look, he got what was coming to him, so we'll go with that. It all came full circle for him, and all the horrible things he did. But yeah, he did some really horrible things. A lot of them I did sort of workshop with some critique partners of how to like, or I'd be like, is it too much if I did this? Or they might be like, nah, how about, and then they'd sort of like stack on as well. So like, it ended up sort of being a perfect storm of horror. So we did actually tone quite a bit of it down with Keo, believe it or not. It was toned down. So we just, not the event so much, but I guess just the layering, like the exposition itself, like just not just pulling it back with the wordiness, so you're not just getting slogged with trauma sort of for like pages and pages. But the general, nothing was removed event wise, but we did sort of tone down the agony a little bit for him. So but I'm glad that people are legitimately shocked by those events. I think, again, being a grimdark writer, you do want people to actually be somewhat horrified by things that happen. I think that's a job well done if I get that response. I do apologize for your trauma, but kind of also glad.
So, uh, I have actually like run out of questions.
That's all right.
So,
I'm on kid duty soon. I have to go pick up my kids. I've got two little babies, so they're about
oh,
due to come home. So
so is it okay if we end the chat here?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, then. It was very nice to talk to you. I had so much fun.
Me too. My
And
pleasure.
I mean, it's my dream to, like read a great book and then talk to the author and just talk about the characters and the events from the book and all that. And
Oh, it's
today,
so
like,
fun. Thank you so much, Tia.
it was so much fun. I am stopping the recording, not the call.
Yeah, that's
So,
okay. Yeah,
yeah,
no worries.
I'll, yeah, bye, everyone.
Bye. See ya.